It started on a Thursday night. Nothing remarkable about the day, just another long stretch of work, traffic, and the low hum of life dragging itself forward. I'd gotten home a little earlier than usual, stopped to pick up some groceries, and decided to make dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta with a homemade sauce and some garlic bread. The kind of simple comfort food we used to love when we first got married. When she came home, I greeted her at the door. She gave me a soft smile, more like a reflex than an actual expression. She complimented the smell, kissed me on the cheek, and disappeared into the bedroom to change. I set the table, lit a small candle, more out of habit than intention, and poured 2 glasses of wine. We mainly ate in silence. She scrolled through her phone while twirling spaghetti onto her fork. I tried asking about her day. She said it was fine. Nothing more. No details or stories. I watched her, noticing how she leaned away slightly when I reached to refill her glass, how her eyes didn't quite meet mine. After dinner, I offered to clean up, and she didn't protest. When I joined her on the couch afterward, I sat a little closer than usual, letting our legs touch. I leaned in and said, "Hey, I thought maybe we could watch that show you like tonight. Or just cuddle for a bit." Her response was soft but firm. She didn't even look up from her phone. "We don't need to be close all the time," she said. The words slid out so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I froze. I asked what she meant, hoping I had misheard. She finally set her phone down and looked at me with tired eyes. "I just mean, we're always around each other. Sometimes it's okay to have a little space." I nodded, not out of agreement, but because I didn't know what else to do. Arguing felt pointless. She leaned back, turned on the television, and within a few minutes, she was absorbed in whatever show was on. I stared at the screen, pretending to watch, but the words she'd said were still bouncing around in my head, echoing louder with each minute that passed. We used to be inseparable. We'd lie in bed and talk for hours, hold hands in the car, and text each other little things during the day. It wasn't always passionate, but there was warmth. There was an effort. That had changed gradually. The shift wasn't sudden. It crept in over time, shorter conversations, fewer kisses, excuses like headaches or long days. I'd chalked it up to stress, maybe even routine setting in. I had convinced myself things would go back to normal. But now she had said it out loud. That phrase, "We don't need to be close," stripped away the illusion I'd been clinging to. It wasn't just a dry spell. It was a mindset, one she had embraced, and I had ignored. That night, when we went to bed, she turned her back to me as she always had lately. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hands folded across my chest. The silence between us felt louder than any argument could. She slept peacefully. Her breathing was even, her body relaxed. I watched the moonlight stretch across the ceiling and thought about what her words really meant. Maybe she didn't want closeness anymore. Perhaps she was comfortable living side by side, like 2 people sharing a lease instead of a life. It made me wonder when I'd stopped being someone she wanted and started becoming someone she merely tolerated. I thought back to the last time we'd been genuinely intimate, not just physically, but in spirit. I couldn't even pin it to a date. Just vague impressions, flickers of old memories. A time when she'd press her hand to my chest as we fell asleep, her fingers idly tracing patterns, her eyes meeting mine in the dark with that soft smile. Those moments had disappeared. I had hoped they'd come back. But now, hearing her say she didn't feel the need for closeness, I realized I might be the only one hoping at all. She'd drawn a boundary. Not angrily, just with cool detachment. A declaration dressed as a comment. A line I wasn't invited to cross anymore. But if she wanted distance, I would give it to her. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't push. I would let her have the space she clearly craved. But it wouldn't look the way she expected. There wouldn't be silent resentment or desperate attempts to win her back. I would show her what it meant to live with actual emotional distance, what it meant when someone stopped reaching out entirely. Because sometimes, when you stop clinging to the person pulling away, they finally realize just how far they've drifted. And when that realization hits, it's often far too late. The change began with silence. Not the cold kind, the type that thickens a room, but a softer version. I stopped initiating small things. When I made coffee in the morning, I only filled 1 cup. I left the house earlier than usual and returned later. My texts, once filled with small check-ins and inside jokes, became infrequent and purely functional. At first, she appeared unbothered. Maybe she saw it as a welcome shift, the breathing room she hinted at. That suited me just fine. We became efficient. That's the word that best describes those first few days. Efficient in the way colleagues might function in a shared workspace. Chores were taken care of, bills were paid, and the fridge remained stocked. But the little gestures vanished. No casual touches in the hallway. I focused on routine, and she didn't protest. I started leaving for work earlier. Instead of grabbing breakfast with her, I ate at a nearby cafe. I'd sit at the corner table by the window, the one we used to love, sipping my coffee slowly while watching the morning city shuffle to life. That cafe held memories, birthdays, apologies, even the day I asked her to move in with me. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. A version of us that only existed in fragments now. At home, I stopped sitting beside her on the couch. I chose the armchair across the room or stayed in the bedroom under the guise of reading. She noticed. I saw the quick glances, the occasional furrow in her brow. Once or twice, she asked if I was okay. I answered with vague assurances, giving her what she always claimed she wanted: space. Physical closeness became an artifact. I no longer reached for her in bed or adjusted the covers around her when she shifted in her sleep. I stayed on my side. Eventually, I moved to the guest room. The first night, I didn't announce it. I simply took a pillow, grabbed a blanket, and settled into the smaller bed down the hall. She came in late, the hallway light casting shadows on the wall, and paused briefly in the doorway. She said nothing. Neither did I. What surprised me was the sense of calm I felt. That guest room wasn't nearly as comfortable. The mattress sagged slightly in the middle, the window overlooked the street instead of the garden, and the lamp flickered sometimes when turned on. Still, I slept better there. I started rediscovering things I had set aside. Books I never finished. Playlists from years ago. Even a neglected journal is buried at the back of my closet. During lunch breaks, I'd sit in the park near the office, sketching or jotting down thoughts. A coworker, a graphic designer from the floor below, stopped by one day. We'd crossed paths before, exchanged polite greetings. That afternoon, we ended up talking for nearly 40 minutes. Her name was Claire. Easy smile, curious eyes. She noticed the notebook in my hand and asked what I was writing. I brushed it off with a laugh. Still, the conversation lingered after I walked away. At home, the chill between us grew. She still spoke when needed, asked about dinner plans or reminded me of a bill due. But there was an awkwardness now, a tension just beneath the surface. I began keeping a small bag in the car with a change of clothes and toiletries. I told myself it was for emergencies or overnight business trips, maybe. But I knew the truth. One evening, she cooked. A rare gesture lately. I came home to the scent of something familiar, lemon chicken, the kind she used to make when we were still dating. The table was set, and 2 glasses of wine were already poured. She greeted me at the door with a smile that felt too deliberate. "I thought we could eat together tonight," she said. I sat down, complimented the food, and ate slowly. She asked how my day was, then mentioned that I'd seemed distant lately. I gave a slight shrug, saying I was just tired. That was partially true. Exhaustion clung to me, but it wasn't physical. It came from years of carrying all the weight of affection, of reaching out first, of pretending one-sided warmth was enough to sustain a shared life. That night, I returned to the guest room. She followed me this time. "Why are you still sleeping in here?" she asked. I looked up from the book I wasn't really reading. "You said we don't need to be close all the time." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She hesitated. The silence stretched long enough to make her uncomfortable. Her fingers twisted the hem of her shirt. "I didn't mean this. You've been acting like a stranger." I nodded slowly. "Maybe I've just been listening better." She blinked, clearly confused. I didn't elaborate. The door closed softly as she left. A few minutes later, I heard her settling into the cold sheets of the master bedroom alone. Lying there, I felt a strange mix of clarity and detachment. No anger. I'd given her exactly what she asked for, a life with space. Freedom from constant attention, from being needed. The irony was sharp. She wanted room to breathe. I gave her an entire house of air, and now the emptiness echoed in ways she never expected. That was only the beginning. She hadn't felt the full weight of distance. The change in her tone was subtle at first, more questions than usual, longer pauses after my responses. She began studying me more carefully, as though trying to decode something that had become unfamiliar. The very distance she once claimed to appreciate now clung to her like fog she couldn't navigate through. One morning, as I brewed coffee in the kitchen, She appeared behind me in her robe. Her voice was soft, testing the air. "Want to have breakfast together today?" I stirred a second cup, but offered no seat at the counter. "I already ate," I replied, sliding my cup toward my laptop. The silence that followed was thick enough to stretch across the entire kitchen. She stood there for a beat longer before turning away, the tap of her heels fading down the hallway. She tried again later that week. This time, she showed up in the guest room doorway holding a bowl of strawberries, something she used to bring me when we curled up for weekend movies. "You used to say these reminded you of your grandparents' garden," she said. "I remember," I answered, eyes locked on the page of a book I had no interest in finishing. She placed the bowl on the desk beside me and walked out, saying nothing more. That night, the television stayed off in the living room. I could hear her moving about, opening drawers, pausing outside the guest room before retreating. Her rhythm was off, her confidence dulled. On Thursday, I stayed out late and met up with Claire for drinks after work. The energy between us was unmistakable. She laughed easily, leaned in when I spoke, and asked questions because she actually cared about the answers. Sitting across from her, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: curiosity. Not about her, but about myself. Who I used to be before the weight of disappointment thinned me out. When I arrived home, it was past midnight. My key turned in the lock with a louder than usual click. As I stepped in, the hallway light flicked on. She was there, curled up on the couch in one of my hoodies, waiting. "Where were you?" she asked without accusation, just confusion. "Out." "With whom?" "Someone who remembers how to listen." That answer seemed to land harder than I intended. Her mouth opened slightly, then shut again as she searched for the proper reaction. I walked past her and into the guest room. This time, she didn't follow. The next morning, she stood in the kitchen dressed for work earlier than usual. Her makeup was carefully done, and her hair was styled with intention. She glanced up from her coffee as I entered. "Can we talk?" "Sure. I feel like you're punishing me." "Punishment implies intention. I'm simply giving you the arrangement you wanted." Her fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the ceramic mug. "I never asked for this. You asked for space. I gave it. But you're pulling away completely." I looked her squarely in the eye. "Are you just now realizing that?" There was a flicker of fear behind her expression, small, but unmistakable. The panic didn't come from jealousy or suspicion. It came from the recognition that I had stopped reaching entirely. That the person who used to check her moods, who picked up cues before she even said a word, had chosen to disengage. Over the following days, her efforts increased. She made dinner 3 times that week, leaving notes beside the plate. "Hope work went okay. There's extra in the fridge if you want more. I miss hearing about your day." I acknowledged none of them. She lingered in doorways, trying to reignite conversations with shared memories. Once, she even showed up beside me on the couch with a blanket and asked if I wanted to watch our old favorite series. I declined, citing a headache. She stayed beside me anyway, hoping proximity would stir something familiar. What she hadn't realized yet was that the emotional detachment had gone beyond distance. I was becoming someone else, someone she no longer recognized, because that version had stopped waiting to be seen. One evening, she entered the guest room while I was sorting through some old boxes. Her face was pale, and her hands fidgeted at her sides. "Are you seeing someone?" I closed the box, stacked it carefully, and then turned to her. "What would you do if I said yes?" She didn't answer, just stood there, caught between rage and disbelief. "That's what I thought," I said, passing by her on my way to the kitchen. The gravity of the moment hung between us like a blade. She realized she had lost something, though she couldn't quite define what yet. What she felt slipping through her fingers was more than affection. It was certainty. I was sure that I would always be waiting, always forgiving, and trying. Later that night, as I lay in the guest room, I heard her crying quietly in the master bedroom. The muffled sobs were brief, likely stifled into a pillow. I made no move to comfort her. The next morning, she looked at me differently. Her eyes tracked my movements like someone watching a stranger sift through their memories. She asked no questions. She was beginning to understand what space really felt like. Distance isn't measured in feet or locked doors. It's the moment someone starts imagining a life that doesn't include you at the center. And I had already started drafting that new life in my head. She changed her wardrobe. I noticed it one Friday morning. Her usual neutral office outfits had been replaced with something more styled, more thought out. Fitted blouse, subtle makeup, a splash of perfume I hadn't smelled in months. She passed by where I stood sipping coffee, glancing toward me like she expected a reaction. I said nothing, just nodded and returned to my phone. That afternoon, the house smelled of roast chicken, garlic, and rosemary. It brought me back to our third date, when she cooked that same meal from scratch, worried the seasoning wasn't correct. I found her setting the table, with candles in the center and wine breathing beside 2 plates. She straightened a napkin and looked up. I thought we could eat together, like we used to. I walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down. She smiled, a small victory lighting her face. Through the meal, she filled the silence with cautious questions about work, the books on my nightstand, whether I still liked the wine she'd chosen. I answered in short phrases, courteous but detached. She looked for something in my tone, perhaps softness. All she found was control. When she cleared the plates, she lingered behind my chair. "Do you want to come back to our bed tonight?" The phrasing struck me, the word, our, like she was grasping at a rope that had already frayed. I turned, watching her hands grip the edge of the counter. "I'm comfortable where I am," I said, rising slowly. "Thanks for dinner." Her breathing shifted. She pressed her lips together but didn't speak as I walked down the hallway. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, lights dimmed, door slightly ajar. I heard her pacing. Once, she stood at the door. Her shadow hovered for several seconds before retreating. The stairs creaked faintly. A glass clinked, and another minute passed before silence returned. By morning, she was already dressed, purse in hand. As she passed the guest room, she paused. "I have a meeting tonight. Won't be home early." I nodded from the desk, typing without looking up. She waited, perhaps expecting a follow-up. I offered none. Later that day, Claire messaged me, up for coffee after work. I met her at the usual cafe. We sat outside, sunlight slipping through tree branches, the city hum softened by the late hour. Claire had a way of asking questions that didn't feel invasive, just curious. I caught myself laughing, a real laugh, over something small she said about childhood cartoons. It had been a while since anything felt that unforced. We didn't touch. We didn't even sit close. But the air around us held a sense of ease, a kind of understanding that required no history, just presence. When I got home, the living room was dim, candles still burning from the night before. She sat in the corner chair, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes followed me as I walked in, dropped my keys, and removed my shoes. "Did you have a good night?" she asked. "Yes." "Where were you?" "With someone." Her expression faltered for the briefest moment, like she'd stepped into a pool deeper than she'd expected. She looked away, nodded once, and stood. The blanket slid off her shoulders. She walked past me toward the kitchen, but stopped halfway. "You're doing this on purpose." "Doing what?" "Pulling away. Punishing me for what I said." I leaned against the wall, arms folded. Punishment implies a lesson. This isn't that. Then what is it? Clarity. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "So that's it? You've already decided?" I stepped toward her, keeping my voice even. "I'm living exactly the way you asked me to. Less closeness. Less weight. Fewer expectations." "That's not what I meant." "You never clarified." She didn't reply, just stood there, blinking too quickly. Her hands curled at her sides. That night, I passed by our room on my way to the guest bed. The door was ajar. She lay curled on her side, one hand resting on my pillow, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. Her face was turned toward it, eyes closed, breathing shallow and broken. It would have been easy to climb in beside her, say something kind, offer comfort. Instead, I kept walking. The next day, she skipped work. The dishes from breakfast remained untouched in the sink. She spent hours in the bedroom. I heard drawers opening, closet doors shifting. By afternoon, I returned from errands and found her at the kitchen table, phone beside her, eyes red. "Do you even care?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "About what?" "This." She waved vaguely at the space between us. "At the table. In the years. I used to." She inhaled sharply, like the air had turned thinner. "Are you seeing her?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." I sat across from her, folding my hands on the table. "Then ask what you actually want to know. Are you in love with her?" "Not yet." Her jaw clenched. She stared down at the wood grain between us, fingers trembling. "I didn't know it would get this far." "You mean, you didn't think I'd stop chasing you?" Tears welled, and she looked away. I thought you just need time." "I needed a connection." She reached for my hand. I pulled away gently. That night, I heard the soft thud of her sobs from across the hallway. This time, they lasted longer. She didn't sleep. I knew because I didn't either. Distance had become real, and she was beginning to feel what that actually meant. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting limply in her lap, eyes focused on the hollow space where I used to sleep. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I didn't think you would really do that." I paused in the doorway, watching her shoulders rise and fall with a slow breath. "I didn't think so either," I said to myself, until I was called redundant. Those words echoed in my mind more deeply than I expected because that's exactly how it felt, being phased out. Quietly, subtly, over time, stripped of value until presence felt more like clutter than comfort. The guest room had grown too familiar. I had memorized the creak in the floorboards by the dresser, the flicker in the bedside lamp, the way the sun cut across the corner wall in the morning. That space wasn't just a refuge anymore. It had become a boundary, one she now desperately wanted to dissolve. But a simple return to the marital bed couldn't erase the chasm. It needed something more deliberate, more structured. That's when I laid out the terms. Clear, non-negotiable. 20 minutes each day, face-to-face, uninterrupted by screens or distractions. One evening per week is entirely ours, planned in advance and treated as sacred, and a minimum of 4 therapy sessions together. If she couldn't agree, I'd contact a lawyer and start drafting the divorce terms. She blinked slowly as I spoke. A cautious silence stretched between us. She didn't argue or plead. She just nodded, barely perceptible, as though her head carried more weight than usual. The first day was strange. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, mugs steaming in front of us. She asked how work was, but her eyes betrayed nerves. Mine carried the calculation. I spoke plainly, avoiding small talk. Shared a story about a client who left a funny voicemail. She laughed, too loudly, then caught herself, cheeks coloring faintly. Those 20 minutes felt longer than most of our evenings had in months. But something shifted during them, something that resembled awareness. On the third evening, she surprised me. She turned off her phone and placed it in a drawer before we sat down. This time, she asked about the book I'd been reading and then told me about a colleague who reminded her of her younger self. Overconfident, slightly reckless, endlessly idealistic. Her voice lost the tension I'd come to expect. There was warmth again, tentative, but real. The therapy sessions began the following week. Our counselor was direct. Older, sharp eyes, a presence that didn't allow avoidance. She asked hard questions, pushed when either of us tried to sugarcoat. When I spoke about the months in the guest room, about feeling erased while sitting 10 feet away from the woman I married, the counselor turned to her. "What do you hear him saying?" My wife exhaled slowly. "He stopped waiting." The counselor nodded. "And?" She swallowed hard. "He stopped needing me. And I didn't realize what that meant until he didn't care if I came home or stayed away." We kept going. Every week brought more tension to the surface. Old wounds, patterns, stories we told ourselves to avoid accountability. She admitted that somewhere along the way, she assumed I would always bend, always absorb the coldness like insulation. "I thought you were just built that way," she said once. "Steady, durable." "Being steady doesn't mean being unbreakable," I replied. Over the next few weeks, she began doing small things again, making tea without being asked, reaching for my hand during conversations, and sending the occasional message during the day without needing a reason. I didn't rush to mirror her. I observed, evaluated, and waited to see if it was sustained or just guilt-fueled effort. I also made changes, said yes to more invitations from friends, scheduled things for myself instead of checking with her first, let silence stay a little longer when we talked, allowing space for reflection instead of filling it out of habit. The dynamic wasn't what it once was, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. It had clarity now. The most significant shift happened on a Thursday evening. We'd gone out to that small wine bar we used to love, the one with the mismatched chairs and the dim lighting. Conversation came easier that night, less forced. There were even a few laughs, genuine ones. On the way home, she said, "I've missed you." I didn't reply right away, just kept driving. When we pulled into the driveway, I glanced at her. "I missed feeling like a partner," I said. She reached over and touched my wrist lightly. "I'm working on that. For real this time." Back inside, she climbed into bed first. I stood at the foot of it, weighing something unseen. She looked up, nervous. "I know I hurt you," she said. and I won't ask to fix it overnight. But I'm here now. I stared at the empty space beside her, the one I'd avoided for weeks. Then I walked into the guest room, grabbed my pillow, and returned to my room. As I settled into the bed, she whispered, "Thank you." I turned to her, voice even. "This is the beginning of something new. That's all it is." Distance had taught us both something valuable. That love is less about proximity and more about presence. That silence isn't always safety. And that when one person walks away emotionally, the return, if there's going to be one, has to be a choice. Made daily. With eyes open.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.